and a very good afternoon, everyone. I hope I'm audible loud and clear. It's interesting to look a lot of old faces. By old, I'm surely not hinting at anyone's age, but at faces who've been stalwarts in this space. With Dr. Chatterjee being at the top of it, it's such a pleasure to be on the same dais as you, sir. And as we were discussing yesterday, I think what we are discussing today is corporate social responsibility. And what the interpretation has been in this roller coaster has started with a small segment of it, which is kind of social services. So I think I compliment Dr. Chatterjee that he never called this a CSS. He never said this was corporate social services. He said this is corporate social responsibility. And corporate social responsibility is a huge spectrum of activities. And as Gitanjali earlier said, Dr. Chatterjee didn't only coin that term and created a framework of what could be done. The smartest way to implement it was to see what could not be done and kind of draw those thin lines. And I think that is where we need to start seeing where philanthropy, where charity, where CSR, and where ESG kind of fall on the same spectrum. And I think my role today on this panel is to draw that journey. So I think where the journey for CSR, as I understand, starts is in this old philosophy that was articulated by Mahatma Gandhi, but was then further, Mahatma Gandhi was influenced on that philosophy through his readings of John Ruskin, which said, we are after all only trustees of the wealth we possess. And without the community and its resources, there would be little wealth for anyone. So I think that kind of lays out the whole first framework of where this is instinct of giving starts. And that instinct of giving is what we call philanthropy, which kind of moves into from personal giving space, which is charity, philanthropy, to the corporate giving space of CSR, to kind of the whole ESG framework, which is actually a way of living. So if you see, if this is all is a spectrum, I give as an institution, and then this becomes my way of life. And compliments to the team who've crafted this journey for the Indian corporate sector. So, so if we look at personal giving or philanthropy, that also gets broken into two parts. The original part is the charity, the original word being the Italian caritas, which was all about to relieve the pain of a particular social problem. To philanthropy, which is actually a Greek word, philanthropia, which is about private initiatives for the public good, focusing on quality of life. So when we kind of just cure symptoms or look at symptomatic cure, that is what checkbook philanthropy is. Our checkbook charity is, and move kind of leaving that aside, saying, okay, let us understand what the core problem is. I remember a story here, one of my mentors had said, and it's attributed to many people. The story is that there was two kids playing on the river bank, and they saw a small kid floating down the river. They jump in, remove that baby, bring it out, these two young men. Then they see two young babies floating down the river. They jump in again and remove those two babies. And this keeps on going on. The number of babies flowing down the river increases, the number of youth jumping to save them increases. A wise old man passes by, looks at them and says, what are you doing? They say, can't you see we are saving these babies? The wise old man looks at the youth and says, has anyone of you thought of going upstream and seeing who is actually dropping these babies in the river? And that kind of, for me, is the classic differentiation between checkbook charity and philanthropy. One is where you're curing the symptoms, you're saving. On the other side is where you're trying to solve the root cause of the problem. And when you bring a very professional setup, an ecosystem of a corporate to think on that root cause problem solving issue, that's when it gets into the spectrum of CSR. Then there are multiple adjectives that could be added to CSR. We could say strategic CSR, we could say insightful CSR, we could say SROI-based CSR, impactful CSR. But CSR at the end of the day is this whole spectrum where you look at your business in a more responsible manner and look at all the three bottom lines of how you impact. Looking at the impact on people, on the planet, and depending on who you talk with, profit or prosperity, the third word of it. So that's the spectrum of CSR that has currently evolved. What we look at today in this space, or for Indian corporates, is by drawing this law, we have actually created an incentive-based ecosystem saying, okay, while you will have to look at your larger spectrum of responsibility, please ensure that this 2% is going for welfare and well-being in a certain framework, outside the scope of certain activities, so that you're actually benefiting your communities and you're measuring what that benefits are. Once you've done that, then come the frameworks of BRR, business responsibility reporting, or ISR, or the international standards, which say, okay, now that we've done this, how are we running our businesses more responsibly? Are we being efficient, like what Dr. Bhaskar Chatterjee is now trying to do in his new role, guiding Vedanta and guiding us on how do we become water positive, how do we become energy neutral, carbon neutral, and how do we go beyond that? Again, as a speaker who spoke earlier than me said, we all can sustain together. We all can sustain individually if we decide to work together. Else, we all will perish individually because of actions done individually. So I think that is where the CSR law comes into place. It brings an uniform playing field for all corporates, says let us all work together for well-being of individuals, for planets, and let us ensure we still create wealth and add profits. So I think that's been the spectrum of activities that we see. It will be really interesting to see how corporates go beyond the 2% to get and adapt the other guidelines. And as we heard, if it actually gets implemented through SEBI, and sir, let me compliment you, I didn't know that part of the journey where you had to actually bypass the Ministry of Corporate Affairs and go to SEBI. I think that is one of the smartest moves that could be, because when SEBI had imposed it, it became a part of the financial framework, and thus probably a uh, more compliance not compliance driven, but somewhere where it's inspired more compliance. So that was the smartest move, and I think that gives you all the spectrum of uh, charity to philanthropy to CSR to sustainability, and that was my job. I'll take questions later. Thank you, Dr. Sushi and everyone.